we all kind of work in cohorts, and there's rumors that we're going to merge eventually back together. But yeah, no, it looks shiny on the outside, but I know at least with my network and with MIPO, there was a lot of hiccups along the way, and we're still trying to juggle a lot of it. But it's working, if it seemed semi-seamless at BPL at least.
Nikki, and we're all here. Okay. Let's do an introduction to one another, I think. Yes. So I'm gonna, just because Nikki's the first on my screen, I'm gonna ask you to go first if you wouldn't mind.
Hi everyone, I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. So I'm Nikki Lebenson Angulo, and I graduated from Brooklyn College. I double majored in history and English literature, but I would say my heart and most of my work was with the history part. I graduated in 2009, and I'm currently the director of partner engagement and communications at a nonprofit called AFS. And we do exchanges for young people and lots of different things that have to do with intercultural learning. So it's just learning between, that doesn't just mean people from different countries, it means a lot of different levels of intercultural learning. And I'm really happy to be here with you
all. Deborah, go ahead, just because.
Sure, yeah, no problem. So my name is Debra-Lee Gray. I am a graduate from college history master's program in 2011. I'm currently an SVP of compensation at Citi. My Citi blue on today. So definitely different from the history major. I didn't take the route of teaching that I had expected that I would, but my skills in history has definitely set me up for some success in HR. So I'm grateful to talk about that.
You're muted, Phil.
And sometimes it's tough to find the place where you're supposed to click. Kay, you're up.
All right. Hi, I am Kay McCallum. I graduated from Macaulay at Brooklyn in 2017. I was a double major in history and chemistry. And like Deborah-Lee, I'm also repping my Macaulay at Brooklyn today. And so I did most of my work in undergrad with the history department, but I very much went into the sciences afterward. In 2017, I did a couple years in industry working for environmental testing, then decided to go back to school. So currently I am a graduate student at McMaster in Hamilton, Ontario. And I am doing some very weird stuff, applying atmospheric chemistry techniques to art conservation. So that's what I'm up to. I'm also going to be teaching a course in a month, and I'm kind of panicking about that. So we also got the SciComm end of things there as well. So.
And Brandon.
So my name is Brandon Korosh. I also graduated in 2017. I had to do that math real quick. It's crazy how fast time flies, but yeah. I am a senior librarian at the New York Public Library. And like everyone else, my journey was kind of roundabout, but I'm definitely grateful to speak on my experiences tonight.
And we're very pleased to have all of you guys. I will be turning the floor over to Professor Johnson in about a minute. I just want everybody to know we are recording, and this will be live streamed. We're on YouTube now. And I'm gonna let people in since it's now, I think, exactly 7 o'clock.
Yep.
And Professor Johnson, the floor is yours.
So welcome to everyone. I'm Casey Johnson. For those of you who don't know me, I teach 20th century US political, constitutional, diplomatic history, and I'm hosting this alumni event with 4 of our star alumni in the Brooklyn College History Department. And one of the things I think that we say as professors all the time is that history trains you to do all kinds of interesting and exciting things with your degree, and often unexpected things with your your degree. And I think the 4 people that we have tonight are testimony to that. So the way this is going to work is that each of our guests are going to speak for 5 or 7 minutes or so about their own experiences, where they've gone after they left the Brooklyn College History Department. I may ask a question or two, but the primary purpose of this is to allow all of you to ask questions. You probably don't need me to tell you this by this stage of our Zoom existence, but you can, as always, ask questions in multiple ways. If you don't want to participate orally, just post a question in the chat and I'll read it out after everyone has presented. Or you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can raise your hand Zoom-wise and I'll call on you. And so with that, I think we're going to begin the presentation. We are live on YouTube and we're recording. Professor Napoli has put the link for this event in the chat if people want to save the link. And so let's start with Deborah Lee, and you have the floor. And of course, thanks to all 4 of you for coming.
No pressure. All right, so hi everyone. My name is Debra-Lee Gray. I am a graduate of Brooklyn College. I did my bachelor's in social studies education. I did my master's in history, with all roads was going to lead me to be a high school teacher. But it didn't work out that way. So as I was leaving Brooklyn College, unfortunately, there was a hiring freeze in New York City schools. So it led me to Citi, which I was already at, Citigroup, the bank. I was already doing an internship. So I actually worked my 8 years in college at Citi. So I did some part-time work there. And when I graduated, I said, teaching is not really going the way I needed to. So let me see if I can get a role somewhere at Citi. And it led me to human resources, believe it or not. And I didn't know how my history degree would apply in any form of fashion in human resources. But now I've been there 18 years. This July will make 18 years I've been at Citi. And my experience with my history degree is in human resources. From a tactical perspective, I mean, the work that you do in your history degree, the presentations, the collaborative work, the research that you have to do, this all applies to the work that I do in human resources. My specialty is compensation. I'm a senior VP for the operations and technology side of the bank. I do compensation for 20,000 employees in over 75 countries. So you can imagine all of the different currencies I have to work with, all of the different local laws that I have to work with, the lawyers, the regulators that I have to work with on a daily basis. And, just understanding just traditions and background in those countries, which I've learned a lot in my history degree, has really helped me on those conversations to be quite easy. It's easier to have conversations with people in those countries when you understand where they're coming from. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is importance of time, deadlines, getting things in, in a fast moving environment, especially in corporate America, being on time for things and being present is very key. That helped me in the history department for sure. Professor Napoli, Professor Johnson, Professor Fishman, Professor Remy, I cannot believe you guys are on this call because I haven't seen you guys in 10 years. But, just being present and getting the work done, that my time at Brooklyn College really prepared me to get through that. And obviously time management. From a strategic standpoint, I think definitely knowing the importance of diversity in the last 3 years have really helped me in my career. The importance of pay equity, understanding 20th century America has really been at the forefront, mostly within the last year, obviously with the events of last summer and yesterday's verdict has really helped, my history background has really helped me move those conversations along when it comes to pay equity and making sure that women and underrepresented minorities are considered when dealing with pay equity issues. And that's something I deal with every day working in human resources and compensation. So, I say all of this to say, history is not being in a history major is not a linear a linear degree. You know, you can really apply anything that you learn on a daily basis in any field, but particularly in human resources or human capital. It has helped me quite a bit. So I do encourage you to not just think small when you're thinking about your degree and what you do. So I think that's my spiel. You guys can ask me questions or when we get to the questions.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't think that any of us who taught you would be surprised that you've been so successful, but it's nice to see the effects of the degree coming forward. Brandon, why don't you go next?
Sure. So forgive me, Deborah, I'm going to echo a lot of your points, but I think this is a good thing, and this is probably a thing that's going to come out when we get to the Q&A. So I'm a senior librarian for the New York Public Library, and I graduated from Brooklyn College in 2017. And like Deborah, I thought I was going to be a teacher for the longest time. I was a double major, and I was also doing secondary education and a slew of minors as well. But for me, where I came from and where I was going, the differences between them and where I ended up, it's hard to articulate, but I feel like when it really hit home for me, the utility in studying history, kind of after I decided that I didn't want to teach it anymore, just came in just simple realizations. I remember I don't know if it was for Professor Napoli's course, but I remember reading this one article, and it was by an environmental historian named William Cronin. And he kind of breaks down the story of the Great Plains, right? And this is another thing, you know, when you study history, a lot of people think it's just a book of knowledge and stuff that happens, right? But we have narrative and we have historiography and how we study it. And so basically in this article, you had this historian trying to understand how people working with the same source material could arrive at drastically different conclusions when it came to the Great Plains. Whereas some chalked it up as a tragedy, some chalked it up as a momentary lapse, some chalked it up as a victory. And really zooming out, it was just that, you know, the world doesn't tell stories, you know, what we read, what we get assigned in text aren't authoritative texts, you know, someone wrote them and they chose where to start, where to end, what characters to include, what sources to use, which to exclude, you know. And for me, reading that and kind of going through the rest of my studies was eye-opening, you know. Once I realized I wasn't necessarily, you know, going that route still, I realized there was utility in this, not just, you know, as a profession, as being a cold hard historian or a teacher, but also in our personal lives, right? So like we could wax romantic about being a historian, you know, and telling these stories. But really, what Deborah had said too, you know, like in reality, you could look at as a history degree as giving you the fulcrum and the lever, right? And these skills are transferable to any career that you can imagine, you know. It gives you the critical thinking skills. It gives you the time management skills. It gives you, you know, the analytical skills to look at the world, not just in your professional life, but in your personal life as well, you know. And so I would say to anyone that's curious about studying history and thinks, you know, I need to be a teacher, a lawyer, or a historian, you're wrong, you know. And, you know, I say that with love. There's so much utility in studying history, you know, and for me in my daily career, you know, like, again, I could bore you with the details, you know, about, you know, studying history allowed me to navigate databases better and I could better serve my patrons that way, or, you know, but really, you know, the benefits ripple out much larger than that, you know, within my professional life, but also my personal life and my worldview. And with that, I think I'll leave it there. I could keep rambling. But...
All right, thank you very much. Very perceptive comments on the continued effect of the, you know, of the discipline. Nikki, why don't we hear from you?
Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you via Zoom. So I graduated from Brooklyn College in 2009, and I Deborah-Lee, were we the same year or close to the same year?
I think so. I think we crossed paths.
Because I had the same experience of like, oh, maybe I should be a teacher. And then the hiring freeze being like, nope. Although I had double majored in history and in English literature. And before I talk about how history helped my career, I just want to thank Brooklyn College, because a lot of things that have happened to me that are good were also just generally because of Brooklyn College. I ended up, when I was a history major, Professor Napoli was actually my honors thesis advisor, because I was a part of CUNY Honors, which then became Macaulay, although I secretly liked it when it was called CUNY Honors better. So, and I did a thesis that was about a Reformed Jew. It was very much focused on oral history. And I looked at a Reformed Jewish congregation that had fired a rabbi for his involvement in the civil rights movement. So I've actually pulled it out recently to look at why that happened. And after that, and I had a great experience with Professor Napoli and also with Professor Remy, who I have not seen in 11 years at this point, so nice to see you. I got, specifically because I was at Brooklyn College, a fellowship where I was able to go to Mexico City and do a 4-month internship in the library at the US Embassy. And then from there, again, this was never planned. I never thought this is where my history major would take me. Ended up working in New York City for the same organization that had given me the internship, which is called the Institute of International Education. And I worked there for 8 years. And I don't know, you probably don't recognize IIE, but how many of you have ever heard of the Fulbright program? So IIE runs the Fulbright program, but that's just one of 200 programs they run. So I started out in a really boring job because they wanted somebody who could write and who wouldn't, say super stupid things in meetings, and a history major will definitely help you with that. So I ended up being a program officer for the Fulbright program. And then I had a boss who was like, what you're really good at is actually communications, not being a program officer. And there's this job in the communications department. Would you like to do that? So I went and I did that, and I worked my way up from being someone who edited the website, again, writing skills, to where I am today, which is I'm the director of communications and partner engagement and communications at AFS. And AFS, IIE had 19 offices around the world, and I learned a lot about working with people who are living in different places in different time zones. When I was there, I did a lot of work with their senior leadership on communications inside and outside of the organization, and I do this same thing at AFS. So AFS has 57 offices, 12,000 kids a year go on our programs when there's not a pandemic. We have 50,000 volunteers around the world. And my job is to make sure that inside of the organization, in between those 57 bodies and that administrative headquarters in New York, things don't go totally wrong. And I also oversee our external communications, so our social media, our press, crisis communications, especially during COVID. And I completely credit my history degree with giving me the skills that I need to do that. I said I focused on oral history and archives, and oral history is, if nothing else, about stories, right? And communications and trying to promote an organization and work with people around. It's also about stories. And in many ways, international education is fundamentally built on the belief that if you share your stories with other people, you probably won't kill them, or like at least there's, a lower chance of murder. So I would say that story element really came through. To echo, what Brandon and Deborah said, the rigor that you learn in terms of writing as a history major, a lot of people today cannot write. Like, I have to worry about people writing emails, and I think I really learned to write. Just the concept of writing a complex paper where you have a thesis. Yesterday, I had to have a conversation with my CEO about a thesis and like what was his thesis for a very stressful presentation we were going to give. We're planning a business meeting. We need to have sort of a thesis, a concept for the event. And I would say more than anything, I've learned about researching a situation before I walk into it. I don't deal with many Americans in my job. I mean, people from the United States, right? Even the people that are in my team, nobody, I'm the only person from the United States. And I think as an American, you really need to understand who we are in the history of the world before you walk into a room filled with people from from other countries, and that's something that you need to know how to do that. You need to be able to research a situation. One of my favorite examples, in my very broad job capacity, I oversaw the closure of AFS in Sweden and then the takeover of that office by Denmark. It helps to understand that Denmark and Sweden hate each other because they fought some like random war back in the 1600s. But that's the context that you need if you're going to be successful in an international setting. Nobody will say, I hate you and think you can't run my office because of 1654. But that actually is in the undertones, in the context of everything that's happening between them. And being a history major tells you how to manage that. And then last but not least, the last thing, sorry if I'm rambling, I want to get, Professor Napoli used this example, and I can't remember the name of it, but it has been seminal in me working in groups. And it was an Italian oral history case where someone had interviewed a number of people who explained an event that had happened to them. And they all thought they were telling the truth, and all of them got the retelling wrong. And I often have to deal in my job with a lot of people who truly passionately believe they're telling the truth, and they are all wrong. Exactly, thank you. And that example has served me in navigating some of the most complex internal communication and external communication situations that I've overseen in my about 11 years working in a communications capacity. So thank you to Brooklyn College, and thank you to the history department for those skills.
Thank you very much. Wonderful comments. It's nice to see the connection between, a classroom exercise and your success. Kay, you now have the floor.
Oh gosh, I'm not sure how I'm going to follow any of this up. So my name is Kay, and I graduated from Macaulay at Brooklyn, unfortunately, after they had switched the name over in 2017. And I, in contrast to my colleagues here, came into the history program quite incidentally. I was a double major in chemistry and history, and I really only tacked on history because I took Shaping of the Modern World with Dr. Mancia, and it was the best class that I had ever taken in my entire life, and I loved it. And so I kind of decided on a whim I was maybe going to do a history minor, checked the program requirements, decided might as well try for an actual major, and things just went from there. But my game plan was actually I was going to be a medical doctor. And as I went through undergrad, I decided that was a horrible idea because I didn't actually want to go into medicine. So when I graduated, I ended up deciding to go into chemistry, specifically environmental chemistry, working in a lab doing environmental sampling testing. And I realized I hated that too. So I decided to go back to school, and that's currently where I am. I am a graduate student at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So I am quite remote today. And I have the incredible honor of being in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology under Dr. Sarah Styler, who is an atmospheric chemist, who hired me on to do some incredibly strange work for the group in applying atmospheric chemistry to art conservation. So when I decided to apply for grad school, I sent in my application on a whim thinking, well, maybe I'll try going back, do a PhD or something, maybe master's out if I don't enjoy it. And within a few hours, Dr. Styler actually emailed me saying, hi, I am on the grad admissions committee for the department. I saw your writing sample. You're really incredible. I'd like to interview you. And I felt very special about that. And I pride myself on having very strong writing skills, specifically because history makes you write so much. If you are in the program, if you've been out of the program, all you do in the program is write. You're never going to escape from it. And in STEM, they do make you write, but in a very different way. And quite honestly, it's not the same. And it's also a little bit inaccessible. And so she was very impressed with my writing, and we talked, and she found out that I had this history background. And then she said, so I had done this strange work with the Tate for a while, and I did a year out there. Would you be interested in continuing that work? And it was an incredible experience that I wouldn't have got unless I had been in the history program at Brooklyn College. And it's a very weird but wonderful way of looking at things, because it really does require that you have this background in specifically history, but art history, archives, museum studies, making sure that you understand what sort of things you're looking at, the context of those things, and why they're important, and how best to preserve them. And so I come at it from a very specific chemistry background. I'm in no way an art conservator, but the people I talk to are art conservators. So there's also bridging this gap between not talking to actual chemists with the same sort of background and jargon that you have. It's talking to people who sort of understand that, but if you said certain words, would never be able to follow along. And so history, as well as all of this writing, also made me focus a lot on thinking how I talk about things, who I'm talking to, what I'm talking about, and making sure that across the board, people can understand it. And in STEM, there's less of a focus on that. I don't know if any of you have ever had to read a scientific paper written for scientists, but being in the program and being in the field, sometimes these papers are just completely incoherent, and you have to sit with a little dictionary and try to figure out what they're saying, because they're writing for a very particular audience. And one of the things about the history department is that you are writing for an accessible audience first and foremost. It doesn't matter if your professor knows everything what's happening. Like, you're expected to make sure that like you understand what's being said, and someone else reading it could make sure it's being said as well. And I think that's very important in the other thing I do, which is science communication, which is mainly a focus on trying to make sure that what I do is accessible and explained well to people who aren't in STEM. And that's very important, specifically in atmospheric chemistry, because a lot of what we do affects human quality of living. So like indoor and outdoor air studies. And if the public isn't well informed on what's going on or how we're getting data, then it's very difficult to have conversations with people. And we're really seeing that play out with climate change, and the fact that there's a whole debate on the science. And I think that part of that is that people aren't willing to read things, but another part is that the outreach could potentially be better. And so making sure that everyone understands what's going on and being able to talk to people well, as Nikki pointed out, is a very important aspect of what I do. And it's definitely was strengthened by being in the history department. And so I think I will stop there.
Right. Thank you very much. Also a fascinating experience. I mean, it seems to me that all four of you have talked in different ways about the manner in which you're continuing to draw upon the skills that you acquired as historians at Brooklyn in jobs that are sort of beyond the range of history now. And I was wondering if each of you might be willing to speak a little on how translatable you've seen your skills as a historian. Was this something that you're drawing on regularly? Was it difficult for you to make the transition into a non-historical career? Any of you can, Brandon.
Yeah, I could start first. So with my profession, it's kind of weird, right? So I need to have a master's to fully have the title of librarian, but I joined as what's called an information assistant, and I would say that even at that time, so I was still getting my BA when I joined the system. A lot of the work that I did was the same, but I would say that almost immediately, the work that I did as a history major was almost immediately transferable. So in my current job now, I do a little bit of reference work. And just, I'd alluded to that before. I said I wouldn't bore you guys with the details, but just simple as knowing how to navigate databases, keyword searching, Boolean searching, stuff like that was, I already came into that when I started my master's program, knowing, and it took a lot of the pressure off. But from that, there's so much leeway as a librarian that I can do. And this is another thing I alluded to. I thought I was escaping teaching when I decided I wasn't going to followed through on the major, but I teach now too, you know? And so developing lesson plans for programs, when I'm doing reference work, all of these things I learned before I even started a master's program, you know, in my field. And that foundation was laid getting my BA. And other things that I alluded to too, you know, I would say there was a hurdle insofar as I needed the document to get the official title. But almost immediately, what I learned studying history at Brooklyn College, I felt present in my career. And I know this wasn't a part of the question too, but in my personal life too, and in my worldview. And it helped push me through a lot of those times when I had to jump through some of those more difficult hurdles. I guess I could leave it there.
All right, Deborah-Lee, what about you?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I mean, I think I kind of alluded to some of the, you know, the content when I'm dealing with some of our international markets and having some background on how, you know, the I guess the current issues in those countries, how compensation affects how not just the personal, but how our presence of a bank can have some type of impact to those countries. And you know, I have very general information. It's not something that it always connects, but the fact that I go out and I research and take that extra time and not just look for people to tell me that information just really helps me in my day-to-day when I have conversations with people in Asia, or if I have conversations with people in a place like Ireland. Like, people don't even know the tensions of you know, Ireland and the UK, and I'm just like, do you guys not understand why that's not, you know, they're not a part of the UK? And just those type of conversations we have, you know, that helps in my everyday conversations with comp.
Nikki, you and Kay spoke about communication and the way in which history enhances communication in areas that are not necessarily historical. And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit, the two of you might talk a little bit more about that, because it seems to me something so we do a lot of that in our courses, and it's nice to hear that seems to have had an impact.
I mean, there's so many examples. It's hard to narrow down. I spoke a lot about dealing with people from other countries, and I do want to echo what Brandon said. Honestly, like, I think I have to sometimes, before the pandemic, a big part of my job was going to regional meetings all over the world. So I would go to regional gatherings of our partner offices, and there was one in Europe, there's one in Latin America, there's one in Asia, there's one in Africa. And part of my, you know, being like, first of all, an American, and then second, being from sort of like headquarters and going into that, you're immediately unlikable. And so, like, it takes a little bit of extra work to try and connect with people, because their default is to put you in like a particular box. And I think, again, just having a history major and having taken a broad history major, right? Like, it's not like you had of course you have your thesis work or your area of focus, but, you know, I've definitely been able to have some pretty interesting conversations with other professionals and connect with them in a way that has helped me build a functioning relationship that could assist me in very difficult situations that came up after. I said this, but part of my job, my title has to do with communications, but in my particular context, that bleeds into a lot of, I guess what you would call organizational development. So dealing with people when they're in a tough personnel situation or something like that. And having been able to have rapport with a person is super important. I think the other thing I would say, I mean, this is a little bit more directly history related, but the two organizations I've worked at are what you would call a legacy organization. Both are over 100 years old. And I would say there is a strange specialty in doing communications for a legacy organization, because in order to not screw up, you have to understand the legacy that you are dealing with. And so it really helps to understand how organizations maintain their history. It really helps to be able to look back through minutes and to be able to dig through articles of partnership or policies and have the patience to do that so that you, again, don't have a misstep. I just want to tell one of my favorite examples, which honestly does have to do with this. I used to be in charge of a company newsletter, which went out to like 1,000 people. So it wasn't that big of in the context of newsletters, that's not that big of a deal. And we decided that we were going to do a history highlight in every newsletter so that we could get the staff excited about this. So one of my colleagues who was helping with me, she sent me, oh, did you know that the first president of IIE, he was the longest running president, and his son was the shortest termed president to ever, or CEO to ever lead the organization. And I was like, that sounds really weird. And so I was like, before I go and put that in the newsletter, let me look it up. And so I spent like a good 2 hours digging it up. Turned out he was either murdered or committed suicide by throwing/falling himself out of a window on like Fifth Avenue. And like Edward R. Murrow, he was being investigated by the McCarthy Commission. And Edward R. Murrow at his funeral was like, he was the greatest patriot of all time. And when they used the Sunshine Laws later, he was totally a communist spy, 100%. And so we didn't put that in the newsletter. And I know that seems minor, but like that would have set off like a letter from the CEO, and maybe the company newsletter would have been killed forever. So yay, research skills.
This is good to know. And Kay, I'm assuming that you're in an academic environment now where there aren't lots of other people who have a historical background. And are there ways that you think that the fact that you have this history and chemistry background has given you kind of an advantage over some of your academic colleagues?
Oh, absolutely. So I started at the University of Alberta, and we recently transferred to McMaster. So I haven't actually had the opportunity to meet anyone face-to-face in the department yet due to COVID guidelines. So that means that I also haven't met a single history grad student. So I have no one who's done history and chem in any way. I'm mainly interacting with people who have chem or biochem or chem bio backgrounds. And I think like definitely it gives advantages in grad school across the board. As Brandon said, like any skill that you have in research, in being able to understand and utilize databases, in writing, those across the board are going to help you in grad school, regardless of what your program ends up actually being. And so much of what I do in my day-to-day is writing and research. I actually spend more time on that than I do in the lab, especially right now. And it only helps. It in no way hinders. But especially in regard to communication, I think that part of the reason why history is so successful in helping its students be able to communicate very effectively is that historians come from a place of a really interesting place of at once universality and respect. So day one in intro to historiography, the writing intensive course, you're essentially told that whatever you're going to do, you are going to treat the people, the places, the cultures that you're studying with respect. You're not going to impose current worldviews, current emotions, current politics on any of it, because these were real people who had real opinions and real life stories, and that is very important to acknowledge. And same in Dr. Napoli's course with interviewing people. You may know these people that you're interviewing, and you may have read about the events that you're going to be talking about, but the fact that these interview subjects have lived through these events, like it means something very different. And history is a real living thing that you're interacting with, and it really should be treated with respect and empathy. And a lot of science, unfortunately, doesn't necessarily focus on that. For example, if any of you have read the book on Henrietta Lacks, I highly recommend reading it. But this concept that we get a lot of data but we don't ever really acknowledge where we get this data from or how this data really affects people, especially in the medical sciences or the biological sciences where you're dealing with real human samples. There's very little done in the way of acknowledging the people who actually have contributed their samples to your research. And in atmospheric chemistry, we have similar problems where there's an issue in inequity with where we have air quality data. So in the United States, a lot of the air quality data that we have comes from places that may not necessarily need to have the most research associated with it. So we have a very good understanding of air quality in New York, but rural areas of the United States or countries abroad, we don't really understand what their air quality is like. And one of the issues is that we do know that there's a huge discrepancy on who gets clean air and why. And so acknowledging these sorts of biases in the data is very important. And I guess in the pursuit of being objective, it does tend to get looked over in STEM. And as far as communication goes, I think being trained in coming from a place of respect and empathy for whoever you're talking to, and acknowledging that their lived experiences are also just as important as your own. In SciComm, even though you're coming from the place of expertise, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person that you're communicating to is somehow less than you are. So I have done science communication for multiple ages, from fellow grad students to kids as young as 5. And there are different ways that you interact with them, but the main premise that these are individuals who have experience and who have interacted with the world before, just potentially in different ways, doesn't make them somehow less than you are just because you have the fancy degree. And I think that history really emphasizes these things and acknowledges the many contributions that people have made, regardless of their area of expertise.
Thank you, very perceptive. I thought we would open it up for questions or comments from the floor. You can obviously leave a comment in the chat, or just unmute yourself and speak up. So anyone who wants to, please do so now.
All right, I'll talk. So I have 2 questions in mind right now. Number one, how can one with a history degree get a job at, say, a tech company like Apple, Google, something along those lines? And for Brandon specifically, how can I get a job as an information assistant? That seems interesting to me.
I can tackle the information assistant question really quick. So the only stipulation, I believe, is that you need to be enrolled in school in a bachelor's program. Right now, if you want to look for openings, you could go onto MIPL.org and /careers and see. I'm not sure if there's IA positions or information assistant positions right now, but that's the only stipulation, is that you need to be enrolled in a bachelor's program. To move up from there, you need to have a master's in information science or library information science, but that's the only stipulation.
Any other potential opportunities? I'm in the master's program, by the way. So
I know that some of it is case by case. I'm pretty sure a master's program would also fly. It's just a matter, if you want to keep on that path, you would need to then get a master's in information sciences or in library and information sciences. But for the duration of your master's program, you could, in theory, apply and hold that position down.
I'm gonna graduate soon. I have to just. Yeah, I'm gonna.
There is you mentioned tech as well, and that's one thing that isn't so talked about. But we need tech people in the library system as well, and that's something that you could do with just a bachelor's, honestly. So I would say, look at what's out there, and yeah.
So I think your first question, when you talk I'm sorry, sounds crazy. I think with your first question, you know, how could you get a role in tech? I think over the years, especially I've seen myself in corporate America, degrees and specialties have been, I don't want to say they've gone away, but I think more companies are just looking for knowledge and experience rather than degrees. It's like you have the BA, that's fine. But I think more companies are steering away from just saying, okay, he has a degree in computers, you know, he has a degree in psychology, we can't hire him. Or he has a degree in history, we can't hire him. I think they're really just looking to get you to the interview phase and see your skills and and if it's just tech experience, simple internships at a tech firm. You know, it's more than just your degree. It's really your knowledge and your skill set that's getting people in the door.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. Like most science-based programs just really want to make sure that you have either some sort of certification that would confirm that you have certain skill sets that are required in whatever job you're searching for, or at least that you can show that you can do certain things. So for example, in tech, if they want you to learn coding languages like Python, you may not need a degree in computer science to show that you know how to code in Python, but at the very least, you should learn it before you apply. So really just like trying to tailor your skill set to really what you want to do is very important.
Yeah, just to give a specific example, I was talking to a business head, the head of our cloud engineering team, and we were talking about the skill sets and what we're going to pay for certain skill sets. And one of the top pieces was preferably a bachelor's degree in computer science. And the head of that business was like, scrap that. I don't even want that. That's not even a qualifying, piece. He's like, I don't care if they have a degree in, classical music. If they can code and if they can talk in, Java or Kubernetes or something like that, I want them on board. So, just if you have internships, that is just, really key. I think in some form of fashion, holds a little bit more weight than some degrees in some cases. I think the hard part is, you have to be in college to get to some of those internships. So you have to make sure that is attainable when you get there. But yeah, definitely make sure you do some knowledge and research, do some research on your own.
Yeah, I want to echo on that too. I would say definitely do research and don't necessarily jump into another program, especially if you're getting your master's right now. There's tons of options. And a lot of the companies are, to echo everything that's been said, are realizing a person that's more rounded out might be the better applicant. But there are a lot of companies partnering with businesses like Coursera, where they're offering certificates where you sign up and you pay like a monthly fee. And you're able to test yourself and then get a certificate that these companies will honor. There's also a new initiative in New York that launched semi-recently for the BIPOC community to get them an entryway in, and there's no experience needed. If you want, after this, you could take my email down and I could send you a link for it. I think the application closes in May, but if you're interested, it's like a boot camp style thing, but you could go in with no experience needed, but it's in partnership with the city and I think Full Stack Academy.
Yeah. And just to add one last comment on that is I think two things. The first one is if you're trying to work somewhere where there's sort of a leap between your practical experience and the job, I would say so much of it is how you prepare your resume for that particular application. And I would say, I hire a lot of people, and I would say most of the applications I review, people don't carefully read the job description. So I guarantee you can find skills that transfer from your history masters for the skill set. Very specifically, look at the skills they're asking for and see like which of these can I match, right? And mimic that in writing. And then I also find, sorry if this is like super basic, but I just find in my experience, a lot of people don't do this. Adding, and if you are not an obvious candidate for a role, just adding a sentence at the top of your resume that just says why you're applying for this, right? And like what your objective is. I know people have feelings about like objective statements. And Deborah, you are involved in HR, so tell me if this is horrible advice. But when I get an application from a candidate that I wouldn't normally consider, that is sometimes a lot more helpful to me than like a long personal essay that comes with their cover letter.
Great advice. Great advice.
I feel like I should plug the Magner Center at Brooklyn College really quickly. Especially if you're looking for internships or applying to certain jobs and you want assistance in crafting your resume. They're a really invaluable resource to have. So definitely I would recommend you check them out.
Thank you. Questions, comments from other people? Richard.
Yeah, good afternoon. Hope everybody is doing well. Me, myself, I find myself in a unique situation. I took and retired from the workforce when I was 62 years old. I'm graduating next month and I'm going to be 67. So I was wondering if that particular point that I'm 67, is that going to cause me any particular problems? I was inspired by Professor Johnson towards thinking about working for the State Department. And at the age of 67, is that too old to be considered to work for the State Department?
I can tell you this, your age is not on your resume, right? So it's, at Citi, as far as I know, if you have the skill sets and you have what they need, they're going to hire you. Especially now, I think, and this is not to exclude anyone, but people of color are in a unique situation in the past year. It's like these companies are dying for diversity and they need, and I think they're starting to figure out the importance of having African Americans or underrepresented minorities at the table. So, and people with experience. And at 67, you have life experience. And I think, it's something that is invaluable and it's something that companies are just, foaming at the mouth for. So I do think don't let age deter you. Please don't, because people are having second careers, well into, at your age, and companies see you as a valuable asset. They don't, you can't put your age on a resume. So I don't think that should deter you. I can't give you details on the State Department, but as long as you have that skill set that they need, and also that life experience as a man of color who's 67 years old, you have a level of experience that they might want at that table. So don't take that for granted.
And you can count on very good letters of recommendation as well, Richard. So that will help you. Nikki, I cut you off.
No. I was just going to say, I think probably, first of all, for anybody to explicitly use your age in any way to judge you for a job, it's definitely illegal. So there's that. But I think when you're in an interview, what I would, first of all, again, coming back to how you write your resume, candidates, I think you should make it super clear that you made a career change, right? And that's where just that, how you write a one-page tight resume, right? Stick to the parts of your career that are super relevant to the role you're applying to. And again, really making it clear that it doesn't really matter that you're 67 because you're entering a new phase of your life and a career, right? So that can be an interesting story that would make you an interesting candidate. And I would bet in an interview, trying to convey that to whoever the hiring manager is and making that clear that this is a career change for you. And that also probably they shouldn't be intimidated by your experience. You know what I mean? So I do think so much of it, again, comes down to how you position. And that would be true of anybody. Forget about history majors. And like Deborah said, the State Department in particular, especially with the change in administration, I think is looking, especially in the State Department, which has a diversity issue. They are in all the different things that diversity can mean. I think they're looking for interesting candidates and candidates from all different walks of life.
Other people with comments or questions? I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to talk who wants to do so.
I
I saw a question that was raised in the chat a bit earlier, and it was, I think, directed towards Brandon. Someone actually wanted you to explain what an information assistant is.
Okay. So the long and short answer is it's a librarian without a master's degree. You do the same things. You just need to go through that extra 2 to 4 years, depending on your speed, to make it official. But you pretty much do the same things. As an information assistant, you're checking in and out books, you're helping conduct programs, you're doing collection maintenance. I would say like the main difference, aside from the slight bump in pay, is you get a little bit more leeway and a little bit more autonomy in what you can do. So since I've become a senior librarian, I've been able to put on and I've been able to conduct my own programs with way less oversight than I was able to as an information assistant. And I talked about the reference help that I do too. As an information assistant, you're really not doing reference help. But I would say really that the main differences are just that. Yeah.
Are there other questions?
Well, let me
Brandon.
put in an addendum on that and just say, if someone is interested in studying this, I feel like I'm like throwing the whole master's degree out the window. There is merit in it, especially if you want to get more specialized within the field. Let's say like if you know you want to become a full-time reference librarian, or you know that you want to work in cataloging, or you know that you're interested in technology, the master's degree will help you carve out a more of a niche within that. That's more transferable once you are in the job market. But yeah, that's about it.
It's a question for Nikki in the chat too. Did you need to learn another language for your job?
Not for my first one, but for the one that I have now, having a second language and having that second language specifically be Spanish was strongly preferred. So I would say in 2021 and the future, having a second language of any sort, always a good move. And it also helped me get married. My husband's Colombian, and I think the history degree helped with that too. So let's just give the history department all the credit.
And from an HR standpoint, learning the second language comes with a pay premium in certain markets. So learning this thing with a second language is very helpful for your pockets. So yeah, you probably should want to do that.
And just as soon as Asim has his hand up, just one note on that. I want to say this. I think sometimes people think like, if you're going to learn a second language, that it has to be perfect, right? There are some jobs where it will say you must have like business level proficiency. But for most other jobs, do not get disheartened or like, don't lose your motivation to learn another language. In my job, honestly, just having conversational Spanish is really what they were looking for, so that I could have meetings. A lot of my meetings are quite honestly in Spanglish. So I would say, like, don't be like, oh man, I'm not going to study a language because I'm too old or I don't have enough time. It's never going to be perfect. Sometimes just having basic conversational skills in the language is really enough. So that I think is something a lot of people get confused about. And again, Deborah, as an HR person, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, if you can have just, basic, I wouldn't say junior, but, I wouldn't say basic, I would say junior level, concept of language. It's very helpful for some of the conversations we had. I know people tend to use Google and stuff like that, but, we do pay some level of premiums for people with certain languages in some of our tech businesses.
Nassim, did you have a question?
Yes. So my question to any one of you is, if you had to go back in time and maybe fix one thing or have wished that you've done one thing, what would that one thing be?
Stay in college a little longer. Not, we're so ready to leave, right? We're just like, we just want to get into the real world and do what we need to do, and go into your career. But I do, in some spaces, I wish, I took a little more time to learn new things, because I think now at this, and I'm not old and anymore, that, you know, but it's just to start all over again would be so much more difficult now. I do think if I would have kind of taken some time to do a second degree or go into a special discipline, because I did general history. I didn't have a specialty that I really wanted to go into. So I think stay in school a little longer if you can afford it. It's worth it.
To jump back on that point, I would say, you know, if I knew now what I didn't know then, just don't psych yourself out and realize that, you know, when you enter higher education, you know, knowledge needs to be specialized. You need to put it in its silos, but they're all connected, you know, and I wish I knew that much earlier, you know, and it sounds, you know, it sounds corny and it sounds like, you know, duh, but I think we forget that a lot of the times, especially when we do start to put the blinders on and get into our declared field. But if there's one thing history has showed me, it's showed me those connections, you know, and it showed me how transferable these skills are and the shortcomings have when we pretend that it's otherwise, you know, when we scoff at people that are studying the humanities, or we say, what are you going to do with that? You know, you could do anything, you know, and you're better for doing it and starting off there. And I'll leave it at that.
I mean, I think I wish I had become an oral, like I definitely, as much as I love my career and it's super interesting, and if my boss is watching this on YouTube, I love my job. But you know, there's always like a part of me that wishes I had actually become a professional historian, but that's not my answer, Nassim. This is about opportunities in other fields. I wish that I had really enjoyed it more. Like you just, during college, you're like so stressed out about stuff. And like, I mean, again, I want to just check my own privilege here. I was a scholarship student. So I also was lucky enough to not have the extreme financial pressure that an education can sometimes create. But oh my God, I wish that was like my full-time thing. If someone could just be like, here's an interesting topic, spend hours reading about it, and then come back to me on your thoughts. And that's like so amazing and such a joy. So I think that I wish that I had realized that that is not the way life will be. Sometimes you have to spend time on things that you have no interest in, and that you should relish every single moment of that, because you will not necessarily get that opportunity again. Like being in a higher institution of higher education is a really unique moment in your life.
Oh yeah, I want to echo that. Once Professor Wills is like directly in my field of vision. I remember I had one course with her, and she had said flat out, "This is a full-time job, and you need to treat it as such, or get out of here." And it is, you know, and I agree, you know, and that's one thing I wish I mean, I guess I towed that line pretty all right, but I wish I had maybe enjoyed it a little bit more and didn't stress out as much. But it's a full-time job, that's right, but it pays off in dividends.
Thank you.
Yeah, on that note, I think I would echo what everyone else said. I think probably my greatest regret is not doing the readings on time. I say it as a joke, but there were too many nights that I was up very, very, very late, panic typing out essays. I submitted an essay to Dr. Meyer's class 3 minutes before the deadline, and I'm very proud of it. 11:57, right on the dot. But no, like I really do wish that I had more time to properly spend. And Macaulay really tries to push you out in 4. It's a great program, but again, they want you out in 4. So there was a lot of pressure on that for me to get out, and at times it was very difficult to do both programs, and I don't necessarily feel like I gave enough attention to either one properly. And now that I have the opportunity to merge them, I'm very grateful for it, and I wish I had focused on that a little bit more in undergrad.
Thank you very much. We're about finished with our time, but I wanted to extend thanks to all of you for coming, and certainly thanks on behalf of the department to Debra-Lee, to Brandon, to Kay, to Nikki for taking the time to be with all of us and to share with us your experiences and your very, very helpful suggestions. It was very much appreciated. For those of you who are students on here, or students who may be watching this on YouTube and want to get in touch with one of the panelists, you can reach out to Professor Napoli. He has their emails, and I'm sure he'd be happy to pass the information on. And with that, I'd like to wish everyone good night. I hope people are well and are staying safe.
Good night, everybody. It's good to see everybody.
Good night, everyone. Good to see everyone.
You guys are fabulous.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Professor Banerjee, I've hold my hat to you. Thank you for all you've done for me, for women in history. I apply that to my job every single day, so I appreciate you. You're on mute, so I can't hear you. But
yeah, I was reliving those moments.